Okay, hello, hello. How are you guys today? Good, fine, good. So for lab on Monday, if you didn't see on Moodle, there is a PDF of a paper from the primary literature for you guys to read, plus a pretty cool convergent evolution. So lab on Monday, we're going to have a discussion about that paper. And then Dr. Pradhan, some of you might know, Evelina from the Department of Biology, she's going to be coming in to talk about her research, which is in part on the anatomy of sex change in fishes. So next week is reproduction week. We're going to be talking about a lot of different anatomical adaptations and evolutionary situations in reproduction, all the way from like mate choice through raising young and everything in between. And one of the things I hope you guys really think is incredible is that we're going to talk about all these different reproductive strategies that exist in nature. And it's really cool that Dr. Pradhan is like part of our department. So she's going to give us the anatomical things she observes in her lab. So please read that paper and please be ready for that. I hope by lab, I will have finished my assessments of your guys' submitted ideas for your proposals, so I can come talk to you. I think things are looking, like whatever questions I might have or enthusiasms I might have. And then Tuesday next week is when I plan on giving you your exams back, just so you know. Okay, so today is our first lecture kind of post biodiversity, post like building the phylogeny and getting like big picture characters like birds have no teeth and turtles have shells. We're past that now. We can actually start talking about kind of themes and patterns throughout the evolution of vertebrates. And so today's senses, next week is reproduction, then the week after that is diet, the week after that is locomotion. And so I hope that all that phylogeny, all those names, all that time you guys spent on that will make it so that when we get into really cool locomotor or sensory adaptations, you'll have this like rich background to draw on. That's kind of my goal and why I structure the class like this. But okay. Two things I hope you are familiar with on this slide. Fort North Valley, focused on Idaho State University. It's where we're sitting. It doesn't look like that right now. And then that thing up there, which is the very much inflated brain of a person, a human brain. And so you guys know this. You have memories and thoughts. You can probably know the names of a bunch of stuff on this image. And I don't want to get too weird on you, but here's my question as we start sensory. All the information gathered by your body and by your senses is integrated into your brain into one solid understanding of like the reality out there. But your brain is really just a bunch of nerves on top of each other. It's a big sled of meat. So it's kind of a dumb question, but talk to your neighbors. How does your brain have any idea about any of this? Because it's in your skull. Okay.
I mean, there's like scientific stuff, but it is pretty. How does one? Never seen it. That's true. Pretty differential. Response to
yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's
sound. I'm just see that. Where gather all of that information. Send that to your brain, get that information, and slowly figure it out.
All right, so there's a lot of potential answers to a pretty silly question like this, but I've been eavesdropping, but can groups share out what you've been talking about?
Yeah, that your brain gets information from like sensory neurons all around your body, and then it just kind of figures out through trial and error as you get older, like what that actually means.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you said a lot of different stuff. So you said different kinds. Who wants to add on to that? Adjust that? Disagree with that? Anybody? Okay, with different kinds of sensory neurons, you're getting information. What else were people talking about? Yeah.
You were talking about like how seeing this image is like bringing back the memory of ISU or the Valley during like summer. And you can maybe have phantom senses kind of like.
Did anybody else see this and be like, ooh, have a little like dilation? You're like, one, your skin, your blood vessels, but it's not. You learn, and there's experience. So on like the individual level, your actual brain was at one point not really existent when you were a little clump of cells. And then you have your own brain that has to learn things, but the instructions that make your brain and make all these sensory neurons are inherited. They're a function of evolution. You got them from your parents' ancestry and the tree of life and all the other animals we could talk about. So there's inherent stuff going on for what your sensory structures are, how your brain really works. You guys are talking about interesting things like this image is evoking things like memory and yeah, I'll just say memory. That's really interesting. So what are these like different inputs you can get about the system, about what's going on out there? So today is all about senses. And I think this is one of those things that like, we just live with it. We are part of it all the time. I'm doing it right now. You're doing it right now. Your body is hearing and seeing, maybe smelling, certainly feeling. Like if you don't look, do you know where your foot is? I bet you do. There's all kinds of things happening where your brain has tons and tons and tons of information. And what is really, really cool is how your anatomy is the thing that feeds into that brain. Do you guys know about things like the blind spot we all have, like right about here? Anybody know about that? So your eyeball has in the back of it a retina where light comes in through the lens, but the actual sensory structure is here in the back. And we all have a teeny little blind spot that's like right here. I'm doing it for myself. For you guys, it's not right here. For me, it's like right here. We all have it, where it's just like the little hole in the back of your retina where the nerve leaves. And so you can do a little trick online, look it up, where you hold a note card with like a symbol on it, and you can go like this, and if you move it, suddenly that symbol will disappear. And it's because your anatomy is such that there is a teeny little hole in what you can't see. And your brain just makes it so you don't think about that all the time. But your anatomy is real. Yeah, AJ.
I just doing blind spot.
Oh, well, I should have had us actually do it. It's a really fun activity that we do in like intro bio sometimes. You just draw like a little asterisk or something on an index card because it's about the right size. And if you hold it out at arm's length, you'll move it around and all of a sudden the asterisk will disappear. And your brain fills in the note card. It's like, oh, and that's like not magic. It's the fact that your eye has a little teeny place where there just can't be cells because that's where the blood and nerve leaves and comes in. And so I just love you have you guys think about the fact that your sensory perceptions of the world are limited in certain ways. You have more senses than other organisms. Some organisms have more senses than you in terms of like their either sensitivity to the same thing or they can sense things that you can't sense at all. And that's really, really, really interesting. And so I hope today we'll get into some of the bigger patterns here. So the first, we're starting with humans today because you guys are humans and that's easy. So what are the things you can sense? Sitting here right now, you can probably sense most of them, but you can even think about your whole day today. What are the senses you're going to be using today? How is your brain going to know about the outside world today? Okay, go ahead and talk to each other.
5 big ones, right? That's a pretty. Yeah.
Every single night you do.
And I am talking about like physical sensation. I'm not talking about like foreboding or desire. I'm talking about physical sensation. Okay, so what are some things? Vision. So, okay. I will go by that. It's funny because there's like all these different categories where we can talk about things. Okay, we'll do vision. What else? Hearing, yep. So you can hear things, you can see things. So, yes. Touch, smell. Taste is a funny one, but yes. The five senses, I hope you all were children at one point and remember this, right? Some of you might have a sixth sense where you see ghosts. You don't. But, okay, so what other senses are there though? There are way more than five. Those are the five easy ones that we talk about, like I said, with like children. But what are the other senses you guys kind of have? Yeah.
What about like balance?
Yeah, balance. Your system knows about balance. You've got your inner ears. It's really funny because some of your sensory structures are absolutely doing multiple things. Part of your inner ear has fluid in it that you know when you're going to fall over. You have this internal sensory system called proprioception. That's why I like know where my foot is right now without having to check. I can feel like sense within your own body. Those are kind of internal, so I wasn't really talking about those today. I'm talking mostly about external stuff. And these are really good human, animal senses. A lot of the animals you guys can think about, vertebrates, we'll talk about vertebrates. A lot of the vertebrates you guys can think about have the ability to do these things and sense things these ways. They might have better or worse versions of this than you have. You are just one of the taxa that have these things. Maybe more fun, I think, all the other vertebrates out there, some of them are doing cool stuff. What are they doing? What do you know other animals might be able to do that you absolutely are like, you can't sense it at all? Okay, talk to each other about this one. Oh, that's
Like for us, it's the same.
all right, what are some phenomena out there that you guys are oblivious to right now? That are, some of them are in this room and you just have no idea, you never would, without fancy instruments that we made up. What else? What do we got?
Electrical currents.
Electrical currents, anybody here sense electricity? You can walk around on a wall and be like, there's the cord. No. So electroreceptors. What else? Ultraviolet light. So that's an interesting one. So ultraviolet light is a kind of light. Remember physics, right? We're going to talk about it. I'm going to make you look at it. There's an electromagnetic spectrum, right? All the way from radio waves to gamma rays. And those are the same exact phenomenon. And the only difference is how, like, the amplitude and the wavelength of the wave, but it's a continuum from like a radio frequency that you need an antenna that's up 300 feet tall to hear it, or like the teeniest little receptors for like a gamma ray that's super small. There are an electromagnetic spectrum. You guys see what we call, and humans made the words, so it's sort of dumb, visible light. And here you have some things like birds and other like lizards that can see ultraviolet. We say that's crazy. For them, visible light, their spectrum is just like this. They still have their chameleon visible light, and like hummingbird visible light is different than human visible light. So you're right, that there's electromagnetic, there's ultraviolet light, infrared, there's radio right now. KPVI or whatever is like coming through this room, right through all of our faces, and you can't sense it, right? Unfortunately, you're not big enough to sense it because the wave is so huge. But whatever, it's still coming through. So people write cool stuff about giant aliens on gas giants that can hear radio. Like, isn't that fun? Anyway, I won't talk about that. So there's something about vision. There's expansions to your vision that are absolutely part of this, but it's still the same sense. What other senses might there be?
detecting heat, but like not through touch, like
What do you mean?
visualizing heat, like pit vipers.
Visualizing heat. Another kind of vision is infrared. You guys can sense infrared radiation as heat when you touch, but other organisms can see infrared. They can see heat. That's interesting. What else? Anything else? Yeah. Amy.
Spiders have the ability to sense when something is actually wet, where for us, it's just a sense of like touch. Like if water is the same temperature as our skin, we no longer feel it.
That's right. Okay.
So spiders actually have the ability, like hydroreceptors, to sense when something is wet.
I've never heard of this. That's amazing. Non-vertebrates, so. That's true, though. You've been going, you go to the right kind of water, or you stop moving once you adapt to the temperature of water in a pool, all of a sudden it feels like you're just standing there. That's weird. Okay. Anything else?
Say we, for humans specifically, at least, we have pretty poor senses of smell. Thinking of like a lot of service dogs who can like smell.
There's the human vision spectrum of vision, and here's bird, here's pit viper. Here's the human smell. And what are you saying, dogs? Maybe, right? That's true. The other one that I think is really fun is related to electroreception, and there's only a few animals that can do this, and actually the more we look into it, the more we realize tons of them can, and we just don't think about it. It's related to electricity. There's a lot of different animals that can detect the Earth's magnetic field, and some of them can see it, which is insane to imagine. You guys ever have polarized sunglasses on? You like tilt your head and you can make the sky go dark and light. You don't know what I'm talking about, go get some sunglasses and do it. There's some animals that like that all the time. When they move their head, there's like X's in the sky. That's crazy. Okay, nice job. These are the ones that you think of all the time. These are the ones that you live by, so it's a great place to start. These are our 5 main senses. These can be grouped together though. They are not 5 monoliths that are each like a pillar on their own. They're interrelated and they do the same kind of things. So it's easier to think of them of like what your actual receptors are doing, what's happening in your body, in your anatomy, to take in that external information, to feed it to your brain, to build this picture of the world. So you can think of them, I like to think of them like this. What's out there in the universe that your body can interact with? So chemoreceptors, being able to actually sense the chemicals around you in the environment. That's where things like taste and smell come in. There's actual molecules that physically bind to your body's anatomy, to your receptors, and give you information about them. So smell and taste are very much related. Mechanoreceptors. So usually that's vibrations, but also you can think about it as things like texture, physically touching things. So when we touch things, we take in all kinds of information, but hearing is also a very special kind of mechanical reception. We're hearing pressure waves that are moving around through the air, or through the water, and they're resonating within our bodies. We're able to transmit them to a little tiny drum, actual little hair trigger cells in your ear, just go like this. And then your brain's like, oh, cool, it's Miley or whatever. But you are still hearing vibrations, mechanical reception of the outside world. And then your eyes are really your only radiation receptors. And so you see a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. We call that visible light. It goes from dark red to violet, and that's the spectrum. It's very weird, but that is how it goes. So we got those are the bigger categories I think are more helpful for like putting these things together instead of treating them as monoliths. Just to give you guys like the anatomy that we want to talk about here, we haven't spent too much time on the nervous system yet. The nervous system will kind of come and go throughout lecture, throughout this whole course. But you guys probably have heard of some of this before. There's 2 big components of your nervous system, your central nervous system, which is your brain, and your spinal cord. That's conduit and processing power, not sensory information. You have nerves all around your spine and your brain, because you really want to be aware of pain and things like that near them because they're so important. But they themselves are relatively inert sensory-wise. Your peripheral nervous system is most of the nerves of your body that leave either off your spinal cord or out of your brain directly, especially the ones that go to your face. And so within that system, your peripheral nervous system, some of what's in there are these sensory neurons. So there's motor neurons that control your muscles and move your body around, sure. But today we're talking about sensory neurons, part of your peripheral nervous system that are feeding back into your central nervous system and ultimately your brain to get put together. There are so many details, it blows me away, it kind of freaks me out. Here's just a good example of like what human skin is like. Most mammal skin is like this. And so within your skin, like any little square part of your skin, you have all kinds of receptors. You can sense pressure, you can sense heat, you can sense pain. They're all within the dermis. You've got a couple layers in your skin, the outer layer that like, gets burnt or like peels off in the sun. That's your epidermis. But down in your dermis, where you have all this sensory stuff. All of this you can think of as touch. But what I like to think about here is that these all have like their own thresholds. It has to be warm enough, or you have to get pricked hard enough for you to actually sense it. There's really fun experiments, which we're not going to do in this class because we just don't have time. But I mean, intro bio classes where you can like have somebody not look and you're touching them with like the tip of a pin and tip of a pen. There are parts on like their forearm where like, oh, I can feel it. And then there's a moment where they can't as you move, and then they start feeling it again. And what it is there's a receptor here and a receptor here. And there's a place in between but there's not really good reception for that little small pin-sized pressure. So you have thresholds for all of these things that have to be met for them to get triggered. What I think is just so wild, and you guys know this is a completely non-specific to this class graph of what an action potential is. You guys remember action potentials going across a cell membrane? So some sort of triggering happens, there's a polarization, and then the cell membrane resets itself. And basically that propagates an electrical signal through. We can think about this as like a neuron. So a neuron receiving a stimulus, that means it sends a signal, and there can be hundreds of them really quick together, one big one, small one. They have the same size each. Sorry, when I say big or small, I mean like the number of stimulations that come in from those cells. And that sends an electrical signal up to your brain. I'm telling you all this is getting into like kind of the physiology aspect of anatomy, right? The way your cell membranes and your cells themselves communicate with one another and give information through. I want to talk about cool vertebrate biodiversity stuff, but I just think here's that same thing talking about like somewhere in your skin, there's a little sensory neuron that maybe can sense like a tickle kind of feeling. It gets triggered in its own special way. It sends electrical charges up a nerve that goes into your spine, up your spine, into your brain. And there's one very specific part of your brain that we know. It's right here. That if you tickle me right here, that's the part of my brain that understands that. And there's a whole system of electricity only. It's just calcium ions and sodium ions going like this. And I just wrote this paragraph because I don't even know what to say about it. I think it's very, very, very interesting. And honestly, it freaks me out that there are just somehow I'm talking to you, you guys are looking at this slide, you're thinking whatever you think about it. You're hearing my voice, and all that is just electrical signals happening in your body that your brain turns into sitting in a classroom and hearing about itself. I don't know. I think it's really weird. And I think one of the most important things for you guys to keep in mind whenever we talk about big ideas like this is that like, oh, I can see the color blue. Well, your brain can't see the color blue, right? It like gets electrical impulses that it turns into that color. And that is probably consistent. We all see the same blue. Blue is a wavelength of light. It has a specific measurement, but I just think it's very important to remember that all of this stuff starts with some sort of external stimulus. When we're talking about external senses, that gets propagated in electrical signals that your brain turns into information you can use. It's a little bit of like a, whoa, dude, like moment, but I just really want to emphasize that the absolute ridiculousness, I think, of the fact that your anatomy is what feeds your brain all this stuff. Anyway, enough of my not saying anything important to you and just sort of ranting. I want to talk about other animals. I want to talk about evolutionary patterns we can see among sensory evolution and how anatomy has changed in senses. And so we're going to spend a few minutes on this. You guys know by now that there's tons and tons and tons of vertebrates in the water and tons of vertebrates on land. The water, doesn't matter if it's oceans, doesn't matter if it's lakes. The land, doesn't matter if it's deserts, doesn't matter if it's mountains, doesn't matter if it's jungle. Between the ocean and the land, there's just tons of different things that are happening. There's tons of different ways signals might be traveling. There's tons of different ways you might receive those signals if you're an organism that lives here forever or here forever. You guys, of course, are land animals. So I want you to talk to each other here, come up with some really good ideas. What are some differences that are going to come in? You can use this as a guide if you're like, what is he asking me? Use this as a guide. What are some differences between land and sea when it comes to what's going to be happening there and sensing things? Okay, please go ahead and talk to each other about that.
Yeah. And you're really trying to breathe. Yeah.
All right, what are gonna be differences between the sensory experiences on land and on water? Or in water?
Hearing adaptation would be a lot different because
So tell me about hearing, what are we some things you would expect?
sound travels a lot faster, louder in water. So maybe you need not near as sharp of a sound.
I'm gonna just say this, sound travels really well. In air, we can think of it as like, sound disperses. It goes up into the atmosphere forever. Water's denser than air is, and so that sound can travel a little more efficiently. What else?
We talked about electrical currents travel better in water.
There are no electroshock predators that don't live in water, right? Water conducts electricity. Air does not generally conduct electricity. What else?
Light bends differently underwater.
And okay, so light bends differently. What's the difference? Give me some more.
You can't see as far underwater because it's your. Well. That's true, we can't see as far underwater.
Well, so light is much denser than water. Water at its best, you have a visibility, I think like the biggest visibility ever measured for like visible light where I can see something is like something like 200 sun feet, like almost 300 feet away. Whereas you guys all know right now, you could go walk up campus and like see the mountains across the Snake River Plain. So the water just, there's not any way to see visible light better than that. There's no animal that's like, oh, but I can see through murk. No. There's ways you could detect things through the murk, but you can't see with visible light. So like, I'm just gonna write. You can see a lot farther on land than you can in water. What else?
Pressure sensory is a lot different because with air you can feel the wind, but underwater you're feeling.
Oh, I think even like air pressure. On land, there's one air, it doesn't matter, if you're on Mount Everest, it's like a little bit less, if you're at sea level, we call it 1 atmosphere of pressure, but as soon as you go down 33 feet, you're at 2 atmospheres of pressure, 3, 4, 5, it goes down. There's, can be tremendous physical pressures on your body and on your organs that you are sensing. There are fishes that only stay deep, they don't come up. When sometimes we pull them up with fishing boats and they kind of explode, they rupture. So you sensing pressure is a big thing in the sea. It's something we don't think about on land at all. Nothing you can do on land. Go up in an airplane, you can pop your ears, but that's a weird thing that we just made up where we made, planes. How about smell? How about taste?
Concentration is gonna be different underwater, or at least like spread.
Spread more. There's really only, on land, what we call, volatile odorants, molecules that can float in the air. Those are the only ones you can smell, right? Taste and smell mean a physical molecule physically binds to a receptor in your nose or in your tongue or somewhere on your body for another kind of animal maybe. We have volatile odorants in the sea. Yeah, stuff's just kind of all like mixed up. The air doesn't carry smell, some smells as well as they can move in the water, because what smells are is actual physical molecules. So in the air, there can be some, dispersing of miles and miles and miles of something. And if it's a volatile thing, you'll be able to smell it from really far away. So there's differences there. Think about for all of these, I'm going to move on in a second, but I want you to think about all these, what this is going to mean for organisms, what their adaptations are going to be to like deal with these differences, different ways they would go about it. I think this is a good, I appreciate this. Anybody, anything else they want to add? I'm going to get into some examples, I think, because I think that'll be fun. So I want to start with chemosenses. So that's taste and smell. Chemosensation is extremely ancient. It is not even an animal thing. It is a like much bigger than that thing. It's probably not even a eukaryote thing. You can imagine even bacteria, right? What is the only thing they're really doing when it comes to sensing the chemical environment around them? They have their membranes on the outside of their living forms. So chemosensation, the molecules around me and knowing what they are, that's a very ancient thing that life can do. I love figures like this. The top figure is a generalized idea, and then I cropped it, but then this was a paper looking at different sharks and how they get to their prey. So eating is, of course, going to be a fundamental part of any animal's life. And so there's a fish there in the center of that field, and this is that shark's sensory apparatus. And so there's a plume of water behind that fish. O for odor. Little molecules that the fish's body is giving off, waste products, whatever. And so the shark's first sensation of a fish somewhere up ahead is going to be odor. And as we go in, it's odor, and then we can actually get turbulence. We're going to talk about what that means in a second. The shark can detect that there's movement up there too in the water. Once it gets closer to the fish, the red circle is supposed to be visible. Oh, I can see the fish. We get closer. Ooh, I can electrically sense the fish. I can hear the fish. And then, of course, like at that point, when it's in its mouth, I'm touching the fish. But I just really like, to think about, in this specific case, a shark grabbing a fish, which is about as ancient as you can get for any kind of animal living in the oceans, capturing another living organism as prey. This is like how the sensory information comes in. And so you can see how, we're gonna talk about a bunch of examples today, but there's like this building. It's a suite of sensory information that gives you the actual thing you're trying to do. In this case, eating a fish. So this is just like a really fun diagram, because here's how a black tip shark navigates through this theoretical space. And they're able to measure different kinds of things, which is really fun. But odor in the water travels pretty well. And there's like the physical molecules, like fish waste is part of it. That's not happening on land. There's not a leopard who's like, because there's like actual impala waste in the air, but it can smell little volatiles maybe from like the dung of an impala, say, or the sweat of an impala. So it's subtle, but it's different. Taste and smell are like really hard to differentiate in the water, because it is just about physical binding of molecules to a receptor. One thing I want to talk about kind of as we go through this lectures, I'm going to be showing you guys kind of like extreme examples. This is, I think, one of the coolest ones. Catfishes have extremely smooth skin. They don't have scales on their bodies. They've lost their scales. They're still teleost fishes, but they've lost their dermal skeleton. And a catfish, which usually lives in a murky freshwater environment, has lost all those scales and instead has taste bud-like receptors all over their body, like even down the sides of their body. And they're really, really, really concentrated out here on the barbels. So you can imagine if you're a catfish looking for food, yes, you have vision and all that, you can see. Yes, you have an ear, you can hear, but you're tasting everything all the time. I mean, I think probably for better or for worse, right? I don't know what it's like to taste everything always. But this catfish has extreme chemosensory structures all over its face, and then it has this extreme anatomy, these total outgrowths of its facial tissue to like collect and collect and collect those symbols, or sorry, signals. So up in the air, you have to get smells that are like floating around. One of the patterns I hope we're gonna get into today that you guys kind of take away are some of like how the different clades work. Mammals, among all the animals on land, mammals easily have the best senses of smell. There's a lot of adaptations to smell, huge amounts of genetic information code for specific receptors. There's like something like 3,500 genes that code for different smelling structures, proteins and regulatory networks to get mammals that really, really have the sense of smell. They also have gross anatomy, visible external anatomy that other animals you see just don't have. There's an elephant shrew, there's a horse. Mammals have a lot of soft tissue on their faces, movable. They want to collect those chemosensory inputs. Mammals have a really, really, really heightened sense of smell relative to other animals. Does anybody work with horses and know what's going on in this picture? Sometimes we'll know what that's called.
Smiling.
Call it smiling. Have you ever heard flehmen, or that word?
Like buffalo do it.
Buffalo do it too. If you go to Yellowstone or something, you might see buffalo, especially when they're in the mating season. So there's a special, in your nose and in any mammal's nose, the air comes in and goes back down to the throat. And there's this like thin layer of very vascularized tissue where you can just smell, you sense things. We also all have, mammals, a separate sense organ in the roof of the mouth. Humans do not really have it or use it anymore, but a lot of animals do. And horses and bison and other mammals that like rut and like live in harems, they can smell like pheromones from other members of their same species. And there's an organ on the roof of their mouth that they use to sense that. And so horses do this, it's called the flehmen. You might see bison do this. And that horse is actually like not just smelling. He's like, oh, lady horse. It's a specific kind of smelling because he's got a specific organ in there to collect that smell. But mammals, as our common ancestry thing, have inherited a really, really excellent sense of smell, but mammals are the ones with a really good sense of smell. Other animals also do things kind of like that flehmen response that the horse is doing to collect odorants out of the air and go put them on his sensory organ to know something about the female's like reproductive state. Snakes are almost constantly doing this. You guys all know that snakes stick out their tongues. What a snake is doing when it sticks out its tongue is it's got a forked tongue, so lots of surface area, gets it wet, sticks it out, flaps it around. It's catching every molecule it can right in front of its face, pulling its tongue back in, and then flicking its tongue up into that organ called the vomeronasal organ. There's a little cavity in the roof of a snake's mouth, and that's getting sensory information very specific to odor. So if you see a rattlesnake and it's going like, it's probably going like this too, because it does not know what you are. It's trying to figure out what's going on. It's collecting odor molecules from the air, which is very cool, very interesting. So it brings the tongue in, gets the tongue wet again, sticks it back out so that it can collect more molecules. I think that's fantastic. Birds, especially compared to things like mammals, have really, really, really reduced chemosensation. Birds don't have great senses of taste. Birds generally don't have senses of smell. A great exception to that rule is a bird like the turkey vulture. So we have turkey vultures here in Idaho. They're going to show up about the time this class ends on migration. They're going to come back up for the summer in like April. And so turkey vultures are pretty amazing because they have an extremely good sense of smell. Even their sister species, other kinds of vulture, have nowhere near the kind of sense of smell they have. And so they detect carrion, roadkill, you'll see them on the side of the road, rotting meat from those volatile odorants that are floating out in the air, because they've got a huge ability to receive that. But they are the exception to the rule. Most birds do not really have good chemoreceptors. You guys probably realize that their whole mouth is basically a keratin beak. They don't have a lot of like tongue and soft tissue in their mouths like other animals do. But this top picture here, talk with your neighbors for a second. What is happening?
I think that's what it is.
Yeah,
There's a lot of, and we feed children at home tries to like any kind of bears or they don't taste it.
All right, so what's happening with this parakeet? So this parakeet is like eating a fruit. This parakeet's eating a fruit. Is this a fruit that you would just fully pop in? Why not? It's hot, right? It's not even cutting the seeds out. It's eating the seeds. That's the worst thing you could possibly do. Why do you guys, some of you might really like this. I like eating those things on purpose in moderation because I like the sensation. But what is happening from the plant's perspective here? What is a chili? How's a chili different from a strawberry?
Capsaicin.
That's literally, yes, it has capsaicin in it, but how come? Why does this plant be like, my fruit is a nightmare to put in your mouth? Strawberry's like, please eat it. The plant is like, please eat my strawberry because then you're gonna poop out my seeds and I love you for it. What is the chili doing?
Please don't eat me. Or if you do, you better be a bird.
I like that better. So chilies are a South American group of plants and their fruits are extremely hot. Mammal predators of that, you can think of that as whatever you want to call it, but people say plant predators. The mammal predators on that chili, a mouse or something, is going to go, love it, hunk, 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 and eat all the seeds, kill all the plant babies as it's eating. It's got teeth, it's going to grind it all up. It's going to grind up the meat of the fruit, the chili part, the fruit part that we eat, and it's going to grind up all the seeds. So this plant is adapted to be like mammals. No, and mammals have chemosensation, and mammals bite this and are like, and they don't eat it anymore. The bird doesn't grind up the seeds, it swallows them whole. And then when the bird poops, it disperses the seeds. The birds are sitting there with just as much capsaicin all over their face as you would, but they just literally cannot sense it. So they don't care at all. They don't have the receptors. I think that's really, really incredible. And there's tons of there's either pollination or seed dispersal syndromes, we call it. All the structures of the flower, all the structures of the fruit or berry or seed that interact with mammals. And so a lot of plants that are bird dispersed have anti-mammal defenses. And one of them is like that. I love that we're humans and our brains are like way too big and we're like, check it out, it burns. Sweet, let's try it out. Like have fun with it. But it's not supposed to be what happens. It's supposed to be you don't like to eat it. Anyway, I think that's a really cool thing. That parakeet literally can't taste the capsaicin in its mouth. I like that very much. All right, so that's chemosensory stuff, some taste stuff, some smell stuff, and setting the stage here for a conversation we're going to have a little later in class today about mammals in general. Mammals have an excellent sense of smell. So now let's talk about mechanoreception. So physically part of your environment outside of you, mechanical receptions you might have. One of the most ancient features, and this goes out for all vertebrates, is the structure called the lateral line. So all over this trout's face, there's these little lines. Some of the lines you can see on a fish's face are the bones it has, but a lot of times those same lines also, and other lines that are not bone lines, are these lines of little pores, teeny little holes in the fish's face. And then it's called the lateral line because along the side of the fish, the lateral part of the fish, there is a line of pores. Almost every single solitary vertebrate that lives in the water has this sort of lateral line. So what that looks like is the water that it's living in is constantly just passively moving in and out of the lateral line system. Underneath the scales, there's a little tunnel of water. And at the bottom of that little tunnel of water are these teeny little hair cells. They're a lot like the same kind of cells you have in your ear that can hear vibration and tell your brain about sound. But they're in the lateral line of a fish. And as water is turbulent, they get moved, they release action potentials out to the fish's brain. And so a fish has this passive system of movement in the water around it. It knows about the movement in the water around it. All fishes have this. This is an incredible thing. And it senses the physical environment around the fish. So that's why you can if something comes up behind the fish, it knows without having to see what's behind it. It knows there's something there. A lot of fishes use their lateral line to coordinate. So all those ridiculous spirals you might see on TV of like sardines or something like that, when they form like a tornado and move as a giant group, as soon as their neighbor does anything, they know it. So they can all move together via this lateral line. This set of like teeny little hair cells that are just like what's happening inside your ear, but arranged along the sides of their body. Water conducts physical movement. The same thing doesn't work for like a flock of birds. You cannot disturb the air enough around you that your neighbor can sense it on that level. Water, though, you can. So in water, this kind of mechanoreception is really possible and super important to how fishes navigate, super important to how fishes move about their environment. What I think is very, very, very cool is that some tetrapods, like frogs and salamanders, their tadpoles have a lateral line that they lose as they become adults. Some salamanders never leave the water and keep their gills, and some of them keep their lateral line as they grow up into adults. But like a toad or something like that, living in the desert doesn't have a lateral line. But when it was in that puddle, it had on its body these little patches of lateral line so that it could sense movement in the water all around it. So amphibians retain the lateral line, but only in their tadpole stage. Please talk to your neighbors about marine amniotes. Do they have a lateral line or not have a lateral line, like a sea turtle or a whale? All right, what do we think? We can do a vote. Lateral line, raise your hand for lateral line, yes, sea turtle. Raise your hand for lateral line, no, on a sea turtle. Not everybody voted. Well, of course they do not. This turtle and this whale, as awesome as they are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, still have to be like, oh, 1 second, and go take a breath at the surface. They don't have gills either, right? They're land living animals. They come from land living ancestry that have secondarily adapted to the oceans. So that dolphin chasing that fish has to go for air and doesn't have a lateral line, but it's still got other adaptations to the water. So amniotes, most tetrapods have lost something like this. This lateral line is very ancient. All the hagfish and lampreys have it, all the convictians have it, all the actinopts have it, and even some of the sarcopterygians like lungfish and coelacanths and tadpoles retain it, but then it's lost for most land-living tetrapods. That's just a cool thing, right? It's a one-way street. That like helps us understand the habitats of these organisms. What's really awesome is some of the oldest fossil tetrapods, like those fishy things that have legs, they've got their lateral line. We can see it in even some groups that are close to the origin of amniotes that still are in the water a little bit. They have a lateral line burnt into their skulls that we then see them lose in evolutionary history. So that's water touch. I want to talk a little bit about land touch. So mammals have very, very, very specialized sensitive skin. A lot of reptiles, this is when we're talking about amniotes, a lot of reptiles are covered in things like scales, feathers maybe on a bird. Mammals can sometimes have a lot of really naked skin, even underneath our fur or in places where we don't have a lot of fur. So we already kind of touched on this, but your skin is loaded with touch receptors. Most animals have the ability to sense touch on their bodies. Even a turtle, if you like scratch a turtle shell, it can feel that. But it's definitely not the same level of like sensation diversity and sensation sensitivity as mammals have. So here's like a snow monkey's hand. It's just like your hand. You guys might remember, right? The fingernails and the finger pads. I almost put a picture of a raccoon feeling for food up here because mammals tend to have really good sensory touch hands. So raccoons are an animal kind of like us, all by themselves amongst the carnivores that have really delicate fingers and they can go like this under leaves and be like, oh, and get something. So touch is something mammals can really do. What I think is really interesting is that a lot of mammals have taken our covering, our hair, which we think is a thermoregulatory adaptation, keeping our body warmth in our bodies, at least originally. Obviously, hair can be used for all kinds of things. Hair is used for display now and all kinds of stuff. But one of the specialized kinds of hair we see all over the place in mammals is whiskers, which are touch sensory structures. They reach out, they can feel vibration. Sometimes they're called vibrissae. So around the eyes, around the nose, around the mouth, specialized hairs that send special signals to the brain, sensory hairs that are responding to touch. This is really cool. Other animals, like I said, though, do have really good senses of touch. I really like videos like this. I almost showed you like a full-on video of crocodiles at a dam. But this is a video of alligators in this patch of river, and they're all just sitting there forever, unmoving, with their mouths open. And crocodilians in particular, crocodiles, alligators, they have extremely sensitive faces. They have a lot of sensory structures on their face. And so that alligator just sits there, and when a fish like runs into its jaws, it can shut its jaws when it feels the fish come in, which is really, really cool. Birds also don't have amazing senses of touch. And then what's interesting then is to talk about the exceptions to that rule. So here's a kiwi from New Zealand, one of these birds that I think is like almost a mammal, doesn't have wings anymore. But there's lots of different kinds of birds that have what we would call a probing bill, a long bill. So you might know like ibises or sandpipers. Kiwis are like this too, where the very tip of their bill is actually loaded with very special receptors for touch. So when its beak is down in the mud and under the leaves in the forest, if there's a little bug that like makes a move, the bill can sense it and they grab it. So that's a really cool thing. I also like this kiwi because it has feathers that are long and delicate, that are just like a whisker, except that's a feather and that's a hair, but they're still like around their mouth. Touch sensory structures that even a bird can have sometimes, which is really cool. A specialized kind of mechanoreception is hearing, vibration, hearing pressure waves. So pressure waves come through, they tilt something, they move something, a hair moves inside your body because it's sensing this vibration. Fishes literally have a stone, it's called an otolith in their ear, and it's one of the things they can use to passively hear things. Sound travels really well in water. I'm not going to talk about hearing in fishes too much because I want to talk about other things, but hearing in water, your body fluids and the water around you are almost the same density. So for a fish, you're just in the sound, it just passes right through you and you can hear it pretty passively. There is one adaptation I want to tell you about that I think is totally insane. A couple of fishes, where's the meter stick? Yes. A couple of fishes have this insane adaptation where they take, here's the fish's face. Inside the fish's head there's its ear. These canals are for balance. The actual hearing takes place right in the middle. Inside that, there's these little sensory cells that get displaced and, transmit the vibration to the brain. So here's the fish's whole body in dorsal view. So there's the eyeballs, you're looking down at the fish, here's the brain, here's the ears. Some fishes, the otariophysians, the ones that are like catfishes and carps and minnows and goldfish, they do this thing that is totally, completely insane. You guys know at this point that a lot of actinopterygians have a swim bladder. So instead of having body tissues that are made of the similar density as seawater, they've got a tube of air in the middle of their bodies floating up under their spinal cord. That tube of air is effectively a hollow as they're swimming in the ocean. It does not have the same density as the water. And so some of these fishes, they receive a vibrational wave, a sound wave comes through the water, and when it hits their swim bladder, which is in their rib cage, it echoes, and then they have pieces of their vertebrae called Weberian ossicles that transmit that vibration very precisely to their inner ear. So there are fishes that use their swim bladder, which you guys know is actually homologous to your lung, to like hear better underwater. Super ridiculous. The point I want to make here is that this ear is homologous to your ear, but then this transmission of like receiving sound in this balloon I have in my body and giving it to my inner ear happens through pieces of their vertebrae. You're going to see again and again and again, if we talk more about hearing, how, and we're going to do that on the next slide, different animals use completely different bones, completely different pieces of their anatomy to transmit the vibration they catch. Anybody upset by this, or maybe you don't care? I think it's insane. On land, hearing is very different. On land, you have to collect the sound. The air is much more diffuse than the water. So if you want to put it into your inner ear, which is full of fluid, just like the ocean was when you used to live in the ocean, you need to transmit the sound down into your little fluid cavity so that your ear hairs can actually turn the sound into something your brain understands. And so all kinds of tetrapods have different kinds of structures for collecting airborne sound. Here's a bullfrog sitting in a pond. This gigantic structure is the eardrum of a frog called the tympanum. So that thing is very thin, and it feels, when you say frog, it hears you. That little tympanum is the thing that hears the vibration of your voice and transmit on a little bone down to the frog's inner ear. Snakes have terrible external ears. They don't really have anything up here. But one thing that snakes can do is they can use their lower jaw. They can rest their lower jaw on the ground. And when they hear vibrations like prey moving or predator coming towards them, the vibrations from the ground travel up their jaw, through the jaw joint, and there's this teeny tiny little bone, this little rod that's very delicate, and it transmits the vibration into their inner ear. So they have a piece of the back of their skull that they're using Frogs have an external part of their skull that they're using to catch sound and then transmit it. Snakes using their lower jaw and then transmit it into their inner ear. Owls do something a lot like snakes in terms of which bones are translating the sound, but I wanted to emphasize a couple of really insane adaptations. A lot of nocturnal birds, like owls, really like rely on their hearing. They use their hearing. If you guys ever catch an owl, I have never caught an owl, but you can pull back the feathers and see that owls actually do have pretty humongous ears hidden by their feathers. But this owl has all kinds of adaptations. It's got a big disc of feathers on its face that actually catches sound and helps put it into its ears. And some of you might know this. This is an owl's skull in front view. So anterior view, eyeball, eyeball. Most nocturnal hunting owls have asymmetrical ears. One ear is in a different position than the other ear. That allows them to triangulate a sound. They hear a mouse moving and this ear hears it different than this ear because of the distance. And then the owl's brain helps them go like this in pitch black. They can triangulate sound because their anatomy of their skulls is altered. They're super, super, super reliant on hearing, which I think is particularly crazy. When you guys think of the hearing, you probably don't think about a snake. You probably don't think about a frog. You think about how you, a mammal, does these same things. So therian mammals, placental mammals and marsupial mammals, have what we call an external pinna, AKA this thing, the thing that you guys call an ear. This is a completely different structure, and this snake is using its jaw to hear. But still, you have this external, cartilaginous usually, in most mammals, but not in you, mobile, you can point it around, disc or big catch surface for catching the vibrations that are in the air. And then in mammals, there's 3 little bones in the middle ear, not one, 3 little bones in the middle ear that work together to transmit sound into your inner ear where the actual sound analysis gets sent to your brain. Well, the hair triggers get triggered and then it's sent to your brain. But because mammals have these 3 bones, we have really, really, really precise hearing. We can hear very specific frequencies, both high and low. There's 3 bones here. There's only 1 bone for most reptiles that's actually doing that transmitting of sound. And like I said, there's fishes that can hear okay, but they're doing it with their vertebrae. I think that's really, really, really wild. And so there's an amazing story behind our 3 inner ear bones, but we're not going to talk about it because this isn't a paleo class. All right, so here's a log scale of the hearing frequencies you can hear because we're humans, we're orange, and so that's what we define as like normal hearing. But here's a bunch of other mammals. Mammals have really interesting hearing adaptations. Go ahead and talk to your neighbor about the hearing adaptations of like other mammals compared to you.
Those bad ones, they go down what you down, if like a dude walking, bad ones. They wouldn't hear you.
That's exactly right. When people who study bats, so like they catch them and they're all right, they really know.
Yeah.
All right, so what do we got here for observations, things we can talk about?
Mice, bats, and beluga whales have really significant overlap of this pain range.
Oh, like relatively high frequency hearing. So like really like high pitch, to go this way, you can think of it as like high pitch, to go that way, you can think of it as like low pitch. That's not the same thing, but the frequency they're hearing. So yeah, there's a similarity here. Certainly outside of our range, they can hear things we can't hear. What else?
I think think it's funny where the dog sits because we often think of dogs as having so much better hearing than us. Yeah.
Which
But
they,
like comparatively.
all it takes for them to be like, to the front door is that little, that little extra, right? And that's what's so funny, right? As soon as humans realize this, it took about 2 years till someone's like, hey, check out this whistle. And everyone's like, what? And all the dogs are freaking out. Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? As soon as we figure that out, we can like invent things. That's amazing. A dog can hear it, you can't hear it. Cat's a little better than dogs on this end. Remember that there's not like, elephants can hear a lot better than we can at low frequencies. There's noises that are so deep that we can't hear them, but an elephant can hear them. Whereas a bat has such high frequency. So that's really interesting. And there's amazing adaptational overlaps between things like bats and dolphins that we'll probably talk about a little later. I really like taking this in. This is like some classic comparative anatomy kind of stuff here. It's talking about what that looks like. I want to talk about the elephant example. Most people think elephants have a much greater hearing envelope than we do. The spread of elephant hearing is much better than ours, but they're so big, so they don't quite get into the highest frequencies, which are the, most delicate, like, their bones are big. I want to talk about something elephants do that's fantastic. Elephants communicate with each other with low frequency sound that almost nothing else in their habitat actually hears at all. So you don't know what's happening, and the lions don't know what's happening, and the giraffes don't really know what's happening. Elephants transmit sounds, like sounds from their throats and all that. They transmit the sounds through their trunks. They can like touch their trunk to the ground and send a rumble into the ground. They actually receive it through the foot pads. They have big fat foot pads. You might think of an elephant's foot as this big column. Elephants are always on the tip of their toes and the tip of their fingers. And then their ankle and their wrist is sitting on giant balls of fat. So it looks like it's a column, but it's not really a column. It's their toes on fat. And they actually receive the vibration in their fat. And so elephant herds keep in touch with each other across huge distances. They know where the other herds generally are because they can send rumbles into the ground that we cannot hear. They travel through the earth, not the air, they travel through the earth. It's super, super, super incredible to me. They actually almost always do it right as dusk happens. And so the air kind of cools down and you get this time when like the rumble will travel at its best. I have done field work in Africa. A lot of my field sites for my fossil work are in a national park in Zambia. And so 2 different times, I've been like laying on the ground in a tent, and you can feel like an elephant thing come through. I can't hear anything, but like my chest is a little bit like this, which is exactly what's happening in like catfish when its lung resonates, which is super, super fun. So these elephants can communicate with each other through low frequency sound that travels through the earth. Insane. You can't hear it. Of course, high frequency sounds, all kinds of other things can happen. You guys cannot hear high frequency sound. When a dolphin like makes, you guys take 2 seconds right now and think of the sound a dolphin makes. Not that one, but like whistles and toots that they can make. When they rip those sounds out into the water, they shoot them through their melon. Really high frequency sounds. We can hear the ending and the starting of those like zips because like they're cranking them up and bringing them down. We don't hear the middle part. They send out these sound waves. Bats do the same thing. Bats send it through they get it out of their throat actually, and dolphins send it through their melon. They're echolocating. They send sound waves out that might bounce off fish, might bounce off a moth, and then are received differently. Bats receive the echolocation like their like satellite dish is their actual nose. Dolphins receive the echolocation bounce back in their lower jaw, just like a snake does. And then they have like a fat thing in their lower jaw, cartilage, fat structure that transmit the sounds to their ear. Both of these mammals are using sound to hunt for prey way beyond what they can see. Bats are hunting at night, so they're not really seeing at all. But they're using high frequency sound to find their prey out in the world. Crazy anatomical adaptations, This should be a nice little face. Instead, it looks like this because of the echolocating the bat does. Of course, the ears are also receiving information too. But echolocation convergently evolved in things like whales and bats. Is a completely specialized kind of hearing. They have to produce high frequency sound and be able to receive high frequency sound. I love it. Just so you know, those are the most famous examples of echolocation, where you use sound waves to catch prey. But there's lots of other animals that echolocate. There's birds that live in caves that make mental maps of the cave. They just squeak the whole time they're flying so they don't run into stuff. Super interesting. And then this is relatively recent, but I really like it. There's some shrews that when they're hunting around in the bottom of a forest, like in the leaf litter, they just make little squeaks. And they'll see the grasshopper or whatever it is up ahead because they echolocate just like a few inches in front of their face all the time. So echolocation is something where you're producing high frequency sounds that bounce off stuff, and then your brain can make a map. Your eyes, the shrew has terrible vision, can still see with. It's super, super crazy. All right, we have 10 minutes. I think we can do some of the cool stuff here. We've talked about mechanoreception, chemoreception. Now I want to talk about radiation reception, light. All right, so go ahead and take this in for a second. Remember your physics class. Talk to your neighbors. What is this thing? So this, just to be clear, this fits right there.
Just rewind on
All right, so what is this a picture of?
it.
The electromagnetic spectrum. We're not going to talk about it at all. What I want you to know is out in space, gamma rays and cosmic rays, these are pulses of electromagnetic radiation that are really, 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 really tight. Really, 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 the wavelengths are like this. Whereas once we get up to things like radio waves, the wavelengths can be kilometers across. But it's the same phenomenon. It is a spectrum. These are not discrete things. So you have the ability to detect, mostly because of the size of the wavelength is big enough that your body can detect it, not too big, not too small. And your brain interprets these things, which we call colors, as like those pieces of the radio wave spectrum, electromagnetic spectrum. And so I want to just give you a little, just absolutely dirty crash course in what your eyeball does. So you've got a lens here on the outside of your eye with a pupil. That's the part that lets light in. This part doesn't let light in. Light gets focused in a few different ways at the front and then sent to the back. And on the back wall of your eye is where all the actual seeing is really happening. This is doing focusing and refracting. On that back wall of your eye, that's where the blood and the nerves are to take the signals to your brain. You've got this sheet of receptors, photoreceptors. There's two really important kinds I want you guys to know. Rods basically tell your brain if there's any light at all. They don't do color. It's light, no light usually for rods. And then there's cones. Cones have the ability to detect color. They're pigmented, so they can detect color, and they're what we use when there's higher light levels. When it's daylight outside, your cones are what's giving your brain most of the information. Human beings, and I'm only talking about humans right now, have three types of cones. Three different kinds of receptors, a bluey one, a reddy one, and a greeny one. And so the electromagnetic spectrum exists like this. You receive really well in this range, and in this range. So these are the wavelengths, the actual physical measurement of like how far the wave peaks are from one another of that kind of radiation. And you see this one, and this one. And then where they overlap, your brain integrates and makes up an idea and tells you, okay, that's kind of like a purpley color. But these are what you actually can receive in. These three different cones are what you have in your eye to receive color vision. And you have really excellent color vision. Here is a phylogeny of vertebrates. I hope you recognize most of it. This should be familiar. That monkey up there, the mandrill, Rafiki, has 3 cones, and you have 3 cones. The ancestral condition for all vertebrates is 4 cones, 4 different ways of seeing color, 4 different peaks on the electromagnetic spectrum for color. We have 3. Talk to your neighbors. What are some evolutionary hypotheses to explain this distribution of characters?
So ancestral
What I'm really looking for is for you guys to say, I'm going to make a red mark on the tree where I think something happened. And I don't want you to explain anything. There's 4 ancestrally, and you and the baboon have 3.
That's what we bring from. Yeah. Not just primates.
All right, where would you guys mark something on the tree to make the change happen?
I was thinking mammalia just because I know birds have 4 cone types, but I don't know for sure.
So 4 cone types is the ancestral situation. I'm telling you that the common ancestor of everybody on this tree's got 4. I'm telling you that the human and the baboon have 3. You're saying you'd put a tick mark at mammalia, and what would that tick mark say?
3 cone types.
So like maybe, so you're saying the loss of a cone right here. Anybody have any other ideas? I'm not giving you almost any information. I'm giving you a ton of animals, the ancestral state, and information for 2 of them. What other ideas can there be? Yeah,
Can we bring in some previous knowledge?
yeah, of course. That's fine.
Okay, we were talking about how mammals besides like primates, a lot of them don't see as many colors as we can. So we think that mammalia loses 2 and then primates independently evolve 1 outside.
But just based on this, so you're talking about that might be something that's true. If this wasn't, did anybody think, he's telling me there's 4 at the beginning and me and this other thing have 3, so maybe just right here. Is there a loss? Did anybody say that or think about that?
No, because of dog.
So you're all bringing in your previous information. That's just fine. I love it. I wish it was something a little different. So there's only 2 cone types for the echidna, the marsupial, that thing, the deer, the hyena, the lemur, and the other monkey. They all have 2. Okay, so now please talk to each other again. If I'm telling you that 4 is the ancestor, 2 is all the mammals that aren't you and the baboon, and 3 is you and the baboon, what tick marks are you gonna make on the tree? What are those tick marks gonna say? That's what I'm asking you right now. To explain the distribution.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
All right, so what do we got here? Andy, you want to tell us again?
So we said that replicable mammalia, there are 2 cones lost, and then the us baboons got 1 back.
Got 1 back. So that is the situation that happened. There's 4 cones, 4 tetrachromis is what we call it. You can see 4 different color peaks is ancestral for all vertebrates. Mammals are weirdos. We lost 1 or lost 2. We're down to a blue one and a yellow one. No, actually don't worry about those colors too much. They're a little bit offset. And then there is a novel mutation within primates where a lemur and a hyena can see just like each other pretty much, but you and a baboon see more color. That is something we actually know is true and happened. Now, it's actually in real life more complicated even than that, because sharks have no cones and amphibians also lost 2 of their situation. So this is the real distribution. So these very colorful animals and these very colorful animals inherited their ability to see all kinds of color from a vertebrate common ancestor, which is super, super cool. Other sharks haven't lost all their cones. It's really complicated. It's a mess. What I wanted you guys to understand though, is that you are very different and very weird. So here's a zoom in of just mammals. So there's mammalia, there's placentalia, and here's primates. And yeah, mammals inherit only 2 color receptors, 2 kinds of cones in their eyes. For almost all of dinosaur time, the mammal lineage is small-bodied, furry, little nocturnal things. For 160 million years, we are like living at night almost certainly. So we've lost the color vision that was adapted for all the other kinds of organisms. That is the working hypothesis for mammal evolution. And then as we come into the modern world, the last 60 million years and mammals take over, some primates go out into the open grasslands and there's a single novel mutation that they evolve and they get 3 color vision. What is an interesting trade-off is that you guys probably know this, all kinds of mammals, including lemurs, have really, really good senses of smell. So when you're out at night for hundreds of millions of years, you're smelling. All these mammals have inherited a great sense of smell. This primate has a great sense of smell, but only two color vision. And here, only these old world monkeys and humans have this trichromatic vision, good daytime color vision. Also remember that all the primates have a lot of emphasis on their vision. Characters I gave you guys with their binocular vision and the fact that their eyeballs are insulated from their jaw muscles. So I just think this is incredibly cool evolutionary story where primates have good binocular vision because they're all climbing around in trees, and then only some of us have really good color vision. This is like a very funny thing that I think is really cool. Not only are you a biped with too big of a brain, but even amongst mammals, you have a bad sense of smell and a really good sense of color. So I think humans are very birdy. We're on two legs, great color vision, bad sense of smell. That's just like birds. A really, really, really funny thing that makes some monkeys and us different from the other mammals is this ability to see color. Another, I think, I laugh at it every time, invention that we have is this. When you want to go out and kill a deer, you wear that color vest because every other monkey, every other guy or girl in a tree is like, there's a guy over there, I can see the orange. And the deer can't see the orange at all because of color vision. I think that is like really spectacular and really a fun thing. Oh, we're way over time. I'm sorry about that. Okay, I will see you guys on Monday.